Hi. Okay, cool. So, like Emil mentioned, my name is Fatema. I'm with the production engineering org at Facebook right now, and I'm going to be talking about sustainability in careers and creating a great ops internship with the help of my friends Hacker Girl and Hacker Boy. I kind of brand myself as a professional intern. I've had internships at Yelp, Facebook, and Rackspace. I've actually been to Facebook twice. I'm in my second internship right now. And it's part of the co-op program at the University of Waterloo. So it's like my degree requirement to do 5 internships. It's not exactly normal to have this many. But I've definitely had a lot of experience in ops and site reliability. That's been the primary focus of most of my internships. So that's kind of why I wanted to give this talk. A couple of housekeeping things before I get into the main portion of my talk. So at the top, you see that thing, ask a question at goo.goal. So this is like some Google Slides thing that I came upon about 10 minutes ago. So it's going to work real well, you guys. But basically, if I don't have time to get to questions, feel free to go there and just like write a question, and I'll either answer it on Twitter or answer it at the end if there's time. And that's my Twitter handle, @fatty_box. Feel free to take pictures of my slides and put them on Twitter or like talk about me. I love that. Just make sure you tag me so I know who's saying what about me at all times. And if you would rather follow along the slides on your laptop and use a screen reader or something like that, all images have alt text. And that's the URL there, fbox.ca/SREcon18. So you should be able to use it just fine with a screen reader. The images, I tried to make them not important. They're mostly just messenger stickers, so a little bit of fun. Otherwise, on this slide, there's just logos of all the companies I've worked at and a picture of me dressed as a witch, because if you go on my LinkedIn, it'll tell you that I'm a computers witch. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the motivation for this talk and kind of why I think it's important. So like Emil mentioned, the theme for this conference was sustainability, including in careers and also in our technology. And part of that is definitely retention. And interns are your future talent pool. College grads are the ones that are going to be coming into your company and becoming site reliability engineers in the future. And something that a lot of people might not know if you've been out of college for a while is that this isn't something that's usually introduced in college. Like, we don't have classes about ops or site reliability. If we have a distributed systems course, it's usually in our 4th or 5th year. So this isn't something that we really learn about at all in our first few years of university. Otherwise, internships are usually our first impression of the technical world. So if they have a bad experience inside an internship, it could cause them to leave the ops field, or it could cause them to leave tech entirely, and that's really bad for our retention. And also, ops interns can have really lasting technical contributions. Some examples of intern projects from some of my friends are someone who took the deployment time of a certain aesthetic picture website down from 12 minutes to 3 minutes. Someone else who helped move an entire deployment from their in-house PaaS to Kubernetes. A project that I've worked on was setting up automatic Pixie booting for a whole bunch of servers inside our infrastructure. So these are projects that matter, and interns do them in like a matter of 12 to 16 weeks. So before we get into what you can do to make your intern's experience really good, I just want to give you a little bit of empathy for interns, what it's like to be an intern if you haven't been one in a while or you haven't met one in a while. So the most important thing to note is that we're short-term, full-time employees, which is a really weird space to be in. You get all of this pressure because you know that you're leaving in 12 weeks or 16 weeks, and you know that you have to finish this project, but you're working like a full-time. And if you imagine what it's like to just start at a company, you know, it probably takes you a couple of weeks at least to get ramped up. And when you're an intern, you have to do all of the ramping up and complete a project, and you know that you're leaving. Most interns are simultaneously doing work for school. At Waterloo in particular, we have to do these professional development courses online once per internship. But I have known students that have done like 6 full online course loads while they're doing an internship, which is wild, but they were doing it. We're definitely often far from home in a new city, which can be really, really scary. And like, I don't know if you've ever tried to get a short-term lease in San Francisco remotely while you're living in Canada, but that's a really hard thing to do, and that kind of logistical work is like a lot of energy that we have to put in before we get there. Interns have little to no benefits. We don't usually have sick days. We definitely don't have vacation. We don't, have health insurance for the most part, so that takes a real emotional toll as well. And we're also less experienced than everyone else, kind of by default, of being an intern, and that can be a hard position to be in when you're on a team of really experienced SREs and ops people. So that's kind of what it's like to be an intern, and now we're going to start talking about what you can do to make that experience a little bit better for them. So the most important thing, even before your intern starts and before they get to your company at all, is that you should talk to your intern. You should, send them an email, introduce yourself, introduce your team, ask them what kind of projects they've worked on in the past, ask them what their experience is. You might be thinking that, oh, this is an ops internship, surely they will understand Linux systems, or surely they'll understand incident response. And this isn't really something that we learn in school, like I mentioned, so you would be surprised at what experience an intern has and doesn't have. You should talk about what your expectations are for them and what their expectations are for you. They might be expecting a completely different intern experience than you're expecting to give them, and it's important to have them prepped for that beforehand. You should also provide information and resources, if you can, about what kind of stuff they're going to get into. Like, is there a programming language that they should try to learn a little bit about? Are there books they can read, that kind of stuff? But also make sure that they know that this is not mandatory. Like, interns will do homework if you phrase it like homework. And personally, I've been given lists of books and stuff to read, and I've never done it. But other interns like to have that, and they also like to know that they don't have to do it, because otherwise they'll spend all their time doing that and not passing their exams. And the last thing that you should try to talk to your intern about before they get in is logistics. Like I mentioned before, it's really, really hard to set yourself up in a new city, especially when you know you're only going to be there for a few months. So, just make sure that they have a house. Ask them if they know how they're going to get to and from work. Ask them if their flights are booked and everything. For the most part, this is the kind of thing that's handled by HR, but I'm sure everyone in this room has had bad experiences with HR in the past. It can be really hard to get information from them, especially if you've never interacted with anyone at that company before. So you, as the intern's mentor, are kind of their first point of contact, and doing those kinds of check-ins with them before they get in is really important. One of the best experiences I had was one of my managers went to a house that I was looking at on Craigslist and actually scoped it out and spoke to the landlady for me and was like, yeah, this looks good, I think that you should live here. And that was like great, because I didn't have to worry about it being like a Craigslist scam. And the next thing to consider is, are you ready for an intern before they even start working? In particular, if you're the intern's mentor, it's a really, really big commitment, especially if they're in their first or second year of university. It's not just a technical commitment. Like, you should be prepared to be doing very little technical work yourself, because you should be putting in a lot of effort into your intern's experience. But it's also a lot of emotional energy and emotional labor that you're going to be putting into this intern. If it's their first experience working at a tech company, they might not be prepared for how companies work, especially tech companies. And you kind of have to be their mentor in both that sense and the technical sense. You also want to make sure that you have buy-in from the other members of your team. You're definitely not the only person your intern's going to be interacting with on a day-to-day basis, so you want to make sure that everyone on your team is kind of prepared to help them out, answer questions, point them in the right direction, that kind of stuff. Project preparation is something that I'll also get to later in more detail, but it's definitely important to prepare a project, or at least some options for a project before your intern gets in. And of course, documentation, because when they get onboarded, you want them to be able to get onboarded. And if you don't have documentation for that, that's a problem for your team in general, because when you hire any engineers, you're going to need documentation for that, but especially for your interns. And on that note, my friend Chaz, and former coworker from Yelp, is giving a talk on documentation, I think in this room, immediately after lunch. So if you want to know more about writing good documentation and how to make that happen for your company, you should definitely go to her talk. So this slide is kind of just a few tips for designing a good project for your intern. It's important to incorporate their skills into it, which cycles back to talk to your intern before they get there. See what they're interested in, see if you have anything that aligns with those interests. Make sure it's something that will actually be used. Intern projects that get thrown away when the intern leaves is extremely demoralizing for that intern, especially if they come back for another internship, look up their code, and find that it's been deleted. You should also make sure that it's something that is kind of realistic in that it involves multiple people, teams, and technologies. None of us work in a silo for real when we're actually working our full-time jobs, so it doesn't make sense to give intern projects that are siloed and don't have anything to do with the rest of your team. Please make sure that it's well scoped for their time frame. Interns come in all shapes and sizes, so some of us might be there for 12 weeks, 10 weeks, 16 weeks, and you want to make sure that you gave them enough work to fill out the entire internship, and not too much work such that they don't get anywhere near finishing it. And this point is maybe not as important as the rest of them, but try to pick something related to your personal work at the company or what project you might be working on right now. That way, when the intern has questions, you'll actually be able to answer them instead of having to send them all over to different places. And next we're going to talk about what kind of stuff you can do during the intern's internship to make it a good experience for them. So in the first couple of weeks, you want to set them up for success. The first thing you want to do is have a meeting like explaining what access to resources they have. So I mean technical resources, documentation, code snippets, who on the team is an expert in what thing, who can they reach to when they have questions. Also explain the kinds of stuff you would expect to see in orientation, even if you think that they might have already heard it, like who is their HR business partner, like who can they talk to if they're having trouble with someone else on the team, who's your manager if they have feedback for you. You think that this is the kind of stuff that would be explained, but a lot of the time it falls through the cracks. And like I mentioned, you're their first point of contact, so they want to come to you with these questions. For the first couple of weeks, you really should be checking in frequently. Interns, they tend to be nervous. Like, we don't want to bother you, especially if we think that you're busy, even if we know that you're our mentor. So you kind of want to be messaging them once a day, having a lot of one-on-ones, just making sure that they're getting ramped up correctly. And you really want to provide opportunity for growth within the company, like projects that you think that they could handle, or if they can do presentations and stuff. But also anything that you see as an opportunity outside of the company that you think your intern would be good for, you should be telling them about that and helping them build their career in general, even if it has nothing to do with their actual work right now. And the last point is that you should treat them like a full member of the team, which, yeah, you want to treat your intern like full-time. So you want to give them full access and permissions if the rest of your team has that. You want them to help out with incident response. Maybe you don't want them running the incident, but if you have a comms person or a point person, they could be doing that. You want to let them have the opportunity to shadow on calls and on points. So if you have a rotation of people that are set up to answer questions from developers on a regular basis, your intern can do that. They're there to be a full-time. And you should have them work the ticket queue if that's important work that your team does. And I know that a lot of people think that this sounds kind of cruel, oh, this intern's only here for 12 weeks and I'm going to put them on the ticket queue, which is the worst part of the job and it sucks. That's a whole other problem. You should be working on the fact that your ticket queue sucks or that your on-call is painful, and actually putting your intern into those situations in maybe a less intense way will help you make those things better, because they'll be telling you all of the ways that it's extremely painful. And that problem's not going to go away when they start working full-time. So it's important that you give them the experience that they're going to have when they work at any company as an SRE or ops person. And I'm going to do a little bit of a side note just to talk about these 3 words, because I think that they can get a little bit confusing. And as an intern mentor, I think ideally you want to be doing all 3 of these things for your intern. So mentorship is something like, did you know that you can apply for this thing? So in particular, to be oh, did you know that you could apply for SREcon to talk about internships? Saying that to someone and kind of guiding them in that direction would be mentorship. Advocacy would be something if you're on a proposal committee or something and you know that your intern has a talk that they're submitting to that proposal committee, advocating for them at that point, being I think that this talk would be really, really good. Maybe not a proposal committee in particular, because I think those are supposed to be anonymous most of the time, but something like that, where you're trying to advocate for them in a larger setting amongst other people. That would be advocacy. Sponsorship would be something that you have control over that you're sponsoring your intern for. So I'm running a meetup, and I would like to invite you to be a speaker at my meetup and talk about internships, would be an example of someone sponsoring me to speak. The last thing that we're going to talk about in terms of what you can do during your intern's internship is expectations and feedback, which is really, really, really important. Right from the get-go, you want to build realistic expectations together with your intern. So this is they should know what's going to happen during the internship. You should know what they're expecting to finish or what they think is within the realm of reason for them to finish. If there's a particular something available at the end, you're up for a full-time offer if you do really, really well, or you're up for a return internship. That should be very, very clear from the beginning. And you should always be iterating on those expectations throughout the internship in your one-on-ones, how's it going? Do you feel like you're on the right track? All that kind of stuff. You also want to be providing regular feedback. As your mentor, you're probably also maybe their manager, you might not be, but in general, you definitely are going to be advocating for them at the end if there's an offer up for grabs. So you should be providing regular feedback to them so that they know where they stand constantly. And you should definitely be asking for feedback in return. Like I mentioned before, interns can give you really, really good feedback just about the structure of your team, how is the work going for someone who is younger and new to the team. They can provide all that kind of feedback. And they can also provide you feedback on how good you are of a technical mentor. But they're really not going to do it of their own accord because they're nervous and scared. So you really have to give them that opportunity very explicitly to talk to you about it. You should also try to solicit that feedback from other team members and other people that they might be working with inside of your company. Like I mentioned, you're not the only person that your intern talks to, and you're definitely not the only person that they work with. So there probably is like a lot of really valuable feedback that other people on your team could be telling you about your intern that you would want to factor in their final reviews and anything else. This last point, ask your intern how they're doing. I think this applies generally to all of your coworkers, but like I mentioned, we're in a new city, we're working at a new company, we might not have any friends, we might not have any support system at all where we are, and you're the person that your intern sees every day, right? They're coming to work every day, they're seeing your face, and you should just check in with them. Like, I'm not just talking about like technically or like, you know, with their job, but like, how are you doing? Are you okay? You know, how is your mental health? Like, that kind of stuff is important, and they really might not have anyone else to talk to about that. And you're their mentor, and like I mentioned, it's an emotional commitment as much as a technical one, so you really want to be there for them. And on that note, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you can do if something has gone wrong during the course of your intern's internship. Like, what can you do to kind of mediate that for them and get the best experience for them regardless? So the first thing that you can do is offer new options, and that means like different hours of coming to work, a new project, a different aspect of the project that they're working on, a more reasonable timeline, something that they think could actually get finished. Pivoting expectations is really, really important. So you have to listen to your intern when they're talking. You know, if they're telling you, I've been working on this project, I've been researching it, and I really don't think that what you wanted to happen is going to happen, you have to be willing to pivot that expectation and trust them when they say stuff like that. And lastly, you have to be their best advocate. You're the person that's been mentoring them. You've been working them this entire time. You're the one who knows what they went through and what kind of limitations they've had in their internship. So when it comes to that final review with your manager or the committee of hiring people, you want to be the intern's best advocate for how, you know, to just represent their work as honestly as you possibly can, regardless of whatever else is happening in their lives. And I think I finished far too early. I don't know how many minutes I have left. Oh, okay, cool. I have some more things to say. They're not relevant necessarily to the talk, but I wanted to thank all of these people in particular for helping me submit the abstract, write the slides, practice the talk, etc. I really wanted to thank Kelly for coming all the way to Germany with me to watch me give this talk. And I wanted to thank all the mentors that I've ever had, because without them, this talk would not exist, for better or for worse. And I wanted to thank my gracious and merciful overlord for paying for my business class flights. And that is my Twitter handle, so if you have any questions that you don't feel comfortable coming up and asking, you could use those slides thingy thing, or you can hit me up on Twitter. And that's also my website if you need another form of contact outside of Twitter. And I think I have lots of time to take questions, so we can do that too.
I've got a question. Oh, well, that's really loud, sorry. You were talking about frequent check-ins with interns. How often would you say you should be checking in? Should you be checking in once a day, once a week, 10 times a day?
That was really loud too. I think that you should at least be checking in with them once a day. Like, you don't have to have a full meeting with them every day, but just like a message on Slack or whatever to be like, oh, how's it going? Do you have any questions right now? Or I recently saw a tweet that was like, you should always ask, what are your questions, instead of, do you have any questions? So something like that once per day, and definitely like a one-on-one meeting once per week, maybe like half an hour. Yeah.
Have you ever found in any of your internships, and you need not name names on this one, that you saw or experienced things that made it more or less likely for you to even consider the idea of accepting a full-time offer there? In other words, do you find that in some cases that they treated you in some cases better than employees, in some cases worse than employees? I guess I'm just trying to put this together as far as how to socialize this back to the business, which in many cases it seems that intern programs are more or less a hiring play. And in the day-to-day of working with a team for weeks or months on end, that gets lost. People lose sight of that. That may not be a clear question.
A lot of people who what?
A lot of people lose sight of that, with the idea that this is, in some ways, a sales pitch. The idea of wanting to convince interns to come work here full-time once they have a degree.
I don't In part, like my personal experience, I think I haven't had anything that was like, oh, I definitely can't come back because of this one experience. But definitely talking to other interns who have worked at different companies, usually the thing that will prevent them like hard from wanting to come back is a really bad experience with a manager. So maybe their team manager or maybe their intern mentor was just not supportive or didn't like actually do those check-ins with them, and they felt like they were really left on their own for 4 months. That is a really, really bad experience, and it speaks to like how they think that it will be in their first few years of working there. So I think that's the #1 thing that can be the worst. There's obviously the obvious things, like if your intern gets like harassed while they're working at your company and then has to deal with the horrible things that happened in HR, they're definitely not going to want to come back after that. So don't let that happen.
So the other way around, what did your experience with intern help you to shape the hiring process or kind of key signals for the usual hiring pool or pipeline? So what I mean is kind of, okay, having this, so one end it's a sales pitch towards the intern to work for your company or to work at the company, but on the other hand you're also assessing this person, okay, would this be a great employee? And maybe you find more out about the intern working with the teams during weeks and months, and what signals or learnings do you have from that which may help shape or change the hiring process?
So your question is, what signals do we get from?
So as an example, so maybe you have an intern who you thought is really into one thing and not in another, but then you saw over working with them that, okay, this is actually a very strong signal and turns out to be a great person to work with, and we should actually look for this signal in our hiring pipeline. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's really, really hard to try to apply those lessons backwards, because reverse engineering what kind of interview that person would give after having worked with them for 4 months can be really hard. I think this is really just general opining from me, but I think in tech we focus far too much on technical interviews, and we really don't care at all about the soft or professional skills like Don mentioned. But they matter a lot more, and I think you'll find that the interns that you enjoy working with the most are the ones that are the best at teamwork and the best at empathy and cooperation and verbal communication skills. And like, you can't select for that from a technical interview or a coding challenge. So I think we should try to focus more on selecting for those, or at least harboring those inside our teams when interns and other people like full-time start working. But in terms of actual like specific signals, I'm not sure.
So I had a question. After going through the internships, do you think as a new hire, when you eventually join a company, do you think that all this advice applies to someone who has who's had the internships before? Do you still need that level of guidance if they've already had technical internships in the past where they've been mentored and guided?
Yeah, I think that really depends on the person. Personally, I've never really needed a lot of technical mentorship, but I've known a lot of other interns that really prefer to have that kind of support constantly from one person. So I would feel like if I went back to one of the companies that I've worked at for my internships, I wouldn't necessarily need like a very specific technical mentor. But I think generally what you really want to do is provide as many options as possible, both for interns and new grads. So if they do need someone to be that on-point person for them, like that person is available whether or not they're going to make use of them.
All right, and I think we have time for one more question.
So there's 2 questions on the Google Slides thing. The most upvoted one is, how do we dispel "I only want to do coding, AI, ML" that new grads often say when looking for roles?
Like you hired someone and they're on an SRE team, but they only want to do software engineering?
I would presume that's the question. It's marked anonymous, so.
I actually think that that can happen, because I've had friends who would apply to Google for internships and they'd get put on an SRE team, but they were expecting to do SWE. So I think that can happen, especially if your teams aren't split like SRE or software engineering and it's more just like infra. And in that case, you should still try to give them projects. It's not like we don't have coding projects in ops and site reliability. Like, there's definitely something that you could think of that would be like more towards their skills of like writing a lot of code. And I think generally, ops projects, or SRE projects at least, really tend to veer towards the software side anyway, because you want the intern to have something that's deliverable. So I think the problem generally skews like that you don't provide them enough ops experience at all. So I think the best answer would be like give them one big coding project and allow them to take part in things like on-call and on-point on the side.
And then I guess 2 minutes. All right, we can do the other question. So in your opinion on, computers are so hard. In your opinion on doing a dedicated project versus doing regular teamwork during an internship, so which is better, I guess is the question.
I think that personally I've really enjoyed when I haven't had like one dedicated project, because it felt to me a lot more like I was part of the team when I was just working on what everyone else was working on. And I also think that having like a project, especially on a site reliability team, like a coding project can be really isolating, because the rest of your team is like working together and like handling incidents and stuff, and you're just kind of sitting in a corner like writing a lot of Python code. And being an intern is like already isolating enough, so it's nice to give them work that integrates them into the rest of the team, and it's also a lot more realistic. But I think it can depend on the person. So some interns might enjoy having, something that they can say, I made this, and this is the thing that I delivered at the end of my internship. I think that tends to be more common on like product teams and feature teams, because people really want to like put out a feature that they wrote themselves. But I think for site reliability, it helps to give them something that's more integrated with the rest of your work.
All right, let's give one more round of applause.